so much. Thank you so much for being here and for bringing your film to AFI tonight.
Excuse me, we can't hear you when you speak in the microphone. You have to put it closer.
Thank you so much for being here at AFI tonight. We're so happy to have your film in the festival. It's such an ambitious project. How did you decide to start with, and with such a broad range of possibilities that your film brings, how did you decide to focus on these specific stories?
Well, it's all decided by the land. Like the premise, as you've just seen, is if you stand somewhere and you look at one piece of land, what the film is exploring is whoever occupied that land before, and this piece of land turns out to be the Mont Royal, and the foot of the Mont Royal I see from my balcony as I was writing the film. It was right there in my view. This is where I've lived for 30 years around that mountain, and I felt the need at a point of my life that maybe I should be filming where I live, because I haven't done that before.
Roger, are you also from Montreal?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I live on the other side of the mountain. So François and I are both on the each side of the mountain, and we used to walk on that mountain every morning. So it's a great place to be.
Yeah, particularly for this film, I'm sure. Now, since you're both from Montreal, what has been your relationship with the history of Montreal, and how did it change throughout the course of this project?
Well, the film didn't change the history of Montreal,
Your relationship.
I mean, if we ever, whatever movie we make, you always stop to think about a particular subject matter. In this case, it's very close to our heart because this is where we live, and I did learn a great deal. Quebec and Montreal is a little bit like most places. It's a mishmash of different occupations and different. We have the autochtone lived there way before the Europeans showed up, and then there was a French regime, and there was the English regime, and then the Irish came in, and there's different waves of immigration, and who we are today is a mix, as a product of that mix, and this is what the film was trying to show. I guess that it's not it's the cross-pollination between different cultures, and I think it's true to Montreal. I think it's true to most places, certainly to Los Angeles, and many other places.
And also, before shooting the movie, François and I, we met with the different chiefs of the First Nation, the Mohawk, the Algonquin. It was very important for us to have their blessing so that we could have real First Nation people on the set. All the First Nation people you see in the movie, they are all coming from different communities. And I can say it was a real work to be able to...
That was an abuse.
It was a real work to, because we're white and there's a lot of centuries of differences. And there was something really important that happened in the movie. One of the chief of the First Nation, who is also a traditionalist, when we shot the Longhouse, he stopped at one point and he came in front of François and he said, "This is the first sign of reconciliation that I have experienced in my life," and he was very touched by it.
Yeah, it's amazing that you guys are bringing up this issue now, because, I mean, I'm not sure what it's like for Canadians, but for Americans, I feel like this is an issue that we are just learning about, the Indigenous people of Canada, particularly with the politics of Canada. Yeah, so it really sheds light on that beautifully. I also want to just talk about the kind of structural resonances between this film and your previous films. There are really interesting relationships between The Red Violin and the 32 short films about Glenn Gould, which are also somewhat vignette-driven. Is there something that drives you, that compels you to this kind of mode of filmmaking, to storytelling?
Well,
François cannot tell a story. He can only tell 4 or 5 stories in the same time.
I think it's the case for most movies, and like at the time of 32 short films, like I went to film schools, and my great fun was to demonstrate that it was the most conventional film structure. 32 scenes in the movie is about an average number of scenes. But maybe the difference that I might have I think the audience is very educated. All of us, we've seen so many films and so many TV series, and we're exposed to so much storytelling. And I guess a lot of my premises, I like to share the structure with the audience and expose it, as opposed to pretend to have a flow of scenes as if it was a continuum. I like to share with the audience the construction and the architecture of a piece, and as anyway everybody's well aware of.
I have a question.
Sure, I'm going to open it up to audience now. So, sorry, where was that question?
Oh, we're just wondering, I'm from Montreal, and I can't help but it's so well done. It's like a fable that touches all my lineage of history. It's moving, it's exhilarating to watch it. It's so well put together. Congratulations, first of all. My question is, was there really a sinkhole or something like that occurred at the, where did you, is that just fictitious, or did you actually?
So the
What
question is
happened at the stadium?
where the sinkhole idea came from, and if there was any fact to that.
Well, the sinkhole obviously is a metaphor, but it's a phenomenon that happens more and more due to humans' work in cities, and also due to the drying of les nappes phréatiques, the underground lakes.
The layers.
So all around the world, like, we see more and more of those sinkholes, and I grew fascinated with the notion of like this hole where you can actually go down and visit the layers.
The layers.
So that was a starting point structurally, but there was no historical evidence of what happened in that stadium. No.
It's a great premise. It's fantastic. I'm in awe. Congratulations.
Merci.
You know, on the matter of that metaphor with the sinkhole, I don't know, have you read any Carl Jung, or were you influenced by that at all? He had a dream where he went through like the top level of his house all the way to the basement, and it was from a more European perspective, him being from Switzerland, but it went essentially all the way from modern day his house, so this is all a dream, to, you know, under layer under, and like went all the way back to like ancient Sumer, and basically took from that sort of the evolution of psychology and human religion. I mean, it's literally almost the exact same thing, like going down all the way through all the layers.
Well, I'm not an expert in Carl Jung, but I've certainly read him, and I was forced to read him, like sometimes painfully, working on the Wagner operas.
Yeah.
But what we're talking about here is very we're talking roots. We're talking about what we plant in the ground and how we relate to where we live. That mountain there has seen a lot of people like us, we're like a very temporary phenomenon where the mountain is looking at me making this movie and think, oh, I remember a guy like you 2,000 years ago with like that kind of curly hair going around. We have a relation to the land. In a literal way and also in a subjective way, this film is very much about regaining my roots, which I think relate to all Quebecers. I think I'm sort of an average Quebecer. but I think it relates also to anyone who lived anywhere. Like I think we're all in today's time. I think we're all in danger of losing memory. Like the beauties of technologies are wonderful. Like there's so much potential, but like I think we've all like drawn into a short attention span, and we all have to make an effort to remember and go back and look at what was there before us. And current technology is not necessarily an encouragement for that.
So the idea for the film, was it like for the 375th of Montreal? 325,
My initial, like, when I started talking with Roger about it, like it was more a Quebec fresco. There was no sinkhole. It was just like trying to retrieve different immigrations, and then we started talking about the sinkhole, and I don't know if it's visible to you, but like this is what we spent for this movie is way above what the local system can allow, and the 375th anniversary was sort of providing an opportunity. So the big fresco of Quebec became a fresco of Montreal, became a fresco of the Mont Royal, and became a fresco of a sinkhole.
That's awesome.
But also, François, because of the 275th anniversary of Montreal, he didn't want to start at zero. He said, what happened 355 years before the discovery of Montreal? So that's why we go back 750 years. We flipped the two.
I think we had another question here.
Yeah,
Yes.
my question was about the 1257 where it opened. And was that when the Iroquois Confederacy came together as a peace among the local area?
How would you be aware of that? Like are you Canadian?
I lived on both sides of Mont Royal in the past, and my people came over in 1648.
Well, it's a very educated question you're asking. Yes, the Confederacy you're talking about was triggered by a character, a historical character. His name is Dikenaweda, and he was the great pacifist, great pacificator who united all the Iroquois nations at the time. He lived at about the same time as my prophet. Like there's a moment where I considered like naming him Dikenaweda, but Dikenaweda is like Jesus Christ or Mahomet or Moises. One of those for them, like is the ultimate prophet. So my character is inspired by him, lived in the 12th and 13th century about that time. And as Roger just said, like I took like the 375th anniversary of Montreal multiplied by 2, so it's 750 years before, as a way of saying, yes, it's great, we're celebrating like the foundation of Montreal as if Montreal started on that date, which is not the case. Like there's so much that happened before, so which is one way of acknowledging that.
Yes, right in the back here.
Yeah, fantastic, thank you. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about music in the film. What kind of music direction did you give? What did you have in mind for the musical storytelling accomplished?
Thank you for your question, because any big fans of Terry Riley in the room? Terry and Guion. I grew up with Terry Riley's music, and it was, for me, it was always like this grand guru that dictated so much of what happened in the last 50 years of music in America and elsewhere, everywhere. Like like he's the, for those who don't know him, like he's the father of minimalism, and he hates to hear that, but like that's just one truth about him. And Terry, we went actually with Roger, we went to see a series of 6 concerts celebrating his 80th birthday, and this is the first time I actually met him in person, and we they asked me to interview him in public, and we became friends over that. But I was already well aware of his work, and it seemed to me that Terry is like sort of like, it's called Land of Souls. Like the oldest souls who worked on, who came around this project is Terry, and his friend, his son Guian also half composed they share the composing of the score. But it was a total trip, so on standard, like far from the way you normally make music in films. And we went on a series of improvisations and tapping into Terry. Terry is known as a grand, beautiful pianist, a virtuoso, and he's not pushing one note on the keyboard here, like he's singing ragas. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but Terry is a big part of this adventure.
And this was happening in Brooklyn. I mean, we had a weekend of Terry Riley music with all kind of people who, Terry Riley was there, Gian Riley was there. There was a master class by Terry Riley that François was interviewing him. And it was the weekend where François gave me the first draft of the script that I've read there in Brooklyn. So it was really the beginning of the movie, and so we kept that from the beginning with integrating Terry Riley in the normal process of making this movie.
I love how you use the music to tie us, like the audience, keep us in a present tense, but at the same time in all those tenses, like from way back there to the present. When you have your shaman or the storyteller singing, and all the way into the conference room where he's going to give his lecture, so efficient. You bring us right with you, I think.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry, but we don't have time for more questions. Maybe the
Let's take
conversation
one
ends.
more, one
Oh,
more,
okay.
one more.
Well, we can do a quick one.
Somebody who hasn't asked a question.
Okay, let's take you in the back here.
Were there ever any issues or conflicts with working with the First Nations people, or did they have reservations about certain parts of it or want more input?
So were there any issues or conflicts working with First Nation people?
Yes, they're like, first of all, you have to find them, and they're spread out in in the territory of Quebec. Like in the big scenes, we have people coming from, like flying to us, busing to us, like driving to us from very, very far. So to get them together, to cast them, to find them, and as Roger said, like we, in most Native movies, like you take Asians, and because it's easier, and like you just plug them there. For us, there was we sense a responsibility to have First Nation play First Nation roles, and we had to pay the price, a logistic price for that. But more than that, like it's, and now it turned really well, but there was a stress of, we're white. I remember somebody asking me, how do you think it would be perceived that a white made a movie about natives? And I said, I didn't make a movie about natives. I made a movie about myself. I looked into my roots, and I found natives there. But really, like, what I'm looking at is a very personal angle into our history. And what collectively we're finding out these days, as you mentioned, here, Canada, Quebec, South America, is that it is time we stop this blinding. Our history has been rewritten by demagogues in the 19th century to fit European models and later American models. The fact is that we were there with the natives from the first time. They showed us the way, they showed us the rivers, the lakes, they showed us how to survive the winter, they showed us everything about this land, and we were very close to them, and now is the time to remember that. And this film is one small contribution in many, like I think there's a current right now, writers, filmmakers, artists, singers, I think, and intellectuals in general. I think we're at the point where we have no choice but to admit that the native culture is in our roots and we are part of it.
Just to add quickly to the great work of François. Last week, François and I, we were in Abitibi, where the movie was closing a festival, and there was close to 100 First Nation people who literally, some of them came out of the wood to come and see the movie. And the thing that they told us after the screening is that they were so happy to hear their language spoken on the screen. So, and François was very specific from the beginning to have the respect of the languages, even the Old French and everything. A lot of research was done. We had many people from the First Nation community to make sure that all the different languages was the right one. And it was really, for them, a question. They were so proud that they were able to hear their languages spoken on the screen.
It's such a beautiful film, and we're so happy to have it here. Thank you so much, François.